Welcome to ENside Politics, our weekly podcast on 9 to 5 things you need to know about San Antonio politics. That was, of course, in honor of Dolly Parton, who passed today. Yeah. We all feel very bad about that.
May she rest in peace.
May she rest in peace. And I am joined today by City Hall reporter Madison Isler.
Hello.
And our very special guest, County Commissioner Justin Rodriguez. So you have such a nice, crisp white shirt. Yeah. We know it was a bloody affair.
It's not podcast attire.
I mean, but you came here from a budget hearing. My God,
and budget work session started up. It's that time of the year.
It's really bad this year. So tell us what the county is facing budget wise.
Yeah. So believe it or not, this is my 8th budget at the county. Time flies. I feel like
I'm kind of shocked.
8th budget at the county, and by far it is going to be the toughest. We've all heard some of the news out there with respect to the city, the economy. The county obviously is impacted, not to the degree that maybe the city is, but it's going to be tight. And the proposed budget, as just to give you an example, last year we adopted a budget that was about $2.8 billion, all funds, and this year the proposed budget is $2.6 billion. So it's been some time, at least it's been, like I mentioned, my 8th budget. This is the first time it's not actually ticked upwards. It's actually going down year over year.
And it's not like Bexar County is getting smaller. You're not losing population.
No, and that's what's the interesting thing about it is, I think some of this is predictable in the sense that, it's hard to predict, what maybe the president's going to do, and we get launched into wars and what that does to the economy. But I think when you look back to, let's just say 2022, 2023, where year over year, the property tax revenues were, I think, 12%. And the next year it was 5%. And the following year it was 2.5%. This year it's actually a negative 1.3%. So it's trending that direction. But I think it's important to know that obviously there's been some changes in, I think, the real estate market locally. And I don't think I don't think that's going to be sustainable. We have growth coming to our community. When that turns around, we don't know. But then you have that combination with what our friends in Austin do to us every year. And kind of restrict some of those revenues in the name of property tax exemptions and look, all good things, I think, for taxpayers, for homeowners, for business owners, but it has an impact. It has an impact on the bottom line.
And correct me if I'm wrong, as I'm sure you will. So county government gets 80% of your revenue from property taxes.
Yeah. And
so exemptions.
Yeah, those all add up.
Yeah. Having a weak housing market.
So I think that's important too to note is the county, unlike the city, city has these diverse revenue streams. The county, as you mentioned, about 80% of our revenues are from property taxes. And so any impact to that, whether it's the real estate market or exemptions, it's going to have a little dip in what we can collect. I think even conservatively, the past few years, we kind of said, well, maybe we grow at 2.5% or 3%. As I mentioned, it's down this year, and hopefully things turn around. But this year, we're dealing with what we have to, and that's focusing on, I think, the necessities of a nuts and bolts budget, making some tough decisions. You mentioned we had a work session today. We'll have another one, I think, next week, with the hopes of adopting by mid-September. So we're in the home stretch here. The next few weeks will be.
Are you trying to overcome a deficit of $145 million over 2 years?
Right. Projected.
Right. Yeah. So how do you close that gap? What is County Manager David Smith proposing? Kind of the highlights.
Well, look, the first thing that is obvious is, you all know, we had the subsidies from the federal government in the name of ARPA dollars, right?
The pandemic relief fund.
Yeah, the pandemic relief fund. And so, look, we were, I think, pretty measured in making, I think, meaningful investments with those dollars, tried to make them kind of one-time capital if we could, because we knew this was going to, we would have to wean ourselves off of it. But we also, coming out of COVID, had to make investments in public health, right? I mean, we needed to make the community more resilient. I think we did that. Back then, Judge Wolf was the judge. And I think we worked well together to try and figure out whether it's standing up a Institute of Public Health at University Health, kind of institutionalizing a public health preventative health department within the county, which is really our core business. We never had a public health department within the county. So those are kind of things that we're having to now take a look at the effectiveness of those programs. Some of them are gonna have to fall off. I mean, that's just the nature of it. But
Commissioner's Court, you used, it was what? I'm going to have to refer to my notes. Forgive me.
I can bring any notes.
I'm aged. I'm aged.
Trust you.
I'm aged. I can't remember this stuff. It's $389 million in ARPA dollars. The county used that to hire about 91 new employees, including 9 for the public health, preventative health department. Right. As you were adding those jobs, were you talking about whether, because inevitably this money was going to go away, and lo and behold, here we are. Yeah. Like that money has to be spent by the end of this year, and then it's gone. Right. There's no accounting for it. Did commissioners and the county judge ever say, well, I mean, we want to create these jobs with the understanding that some of them are going to go away, and probably here are the ones that are going to be on the chopping block when this money goes.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to, look, every, I think, level of government augments their positions, their budgets with grant funding. And sometimes positions are grant funded, and when that person's hired, hey, your position is contingent on this funding continuing. Mm-hmm. So I think we knew that. Obviously, you hope that maybe there's an opportunity to continue some of those programs, maybe with supplemental grants down the road. But I think we knew this was coming, and it's not a secret. No one's pulling the rug out from under us. I mean, we knew we were going to have to make tough decisions, but I think we also knew the responsibility we have to make, I mentioned, meaningful investments with the dollars, really once in a generation type dollars, and how we could, again, create an infrastructure that was a safety net for individuals should there be another pandemic, or people say when there's another pandemic. So I think those kind of investments were important to make, even if we knew at some point we would have to pivot and some of those positions wouldn't continue.
Right. So I think, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the proposed budget includes a total of 1 job cut. Does that sound right? In the heritage, basically in the county museum in the Bexar County.
Yeah, I'll have to double check that. What I understand from the proposed budget, it was certainly flat. The staff's not recommending a cost of living increase. I think there's still debate as opposed to in terms of what position that may be cut, what maybe any kind of restructuring. There won't be mass layoffs. I'll just say that. I mean, we know there are a lot of folks and families that are supported by Bexar County, but yeah, there may be a position or two that have to get eliminated. But that'll be made with careful deliberation by the court, and hopefully it won't result in any kind of widespread cutting of positions.
One of the proposals on the table right now seems to be potentially dipping into the reserves for the budget, or raising property taxes. Reserve seems like a more appealing solution to residents, but that's also risky.
It is.
Yeah, is that actually an appealing option for you?
So I don't know that it's been presented as either or. Those are definitely options, right? So I think it seems as though the preliminary discussions around raising the tax rate aren't going anywhere. I think the court feels pretty strongly with the way consumers or constituents are getting hit with rising gas prices, inflation, grocery prices. We don't want to hit them again with a tax rate increase. I think the alternative is, you're right. I mean, we have to look at ways we can cut spending, and some of that may be the programs we discussed. I forgot the other thing you mentioned, but at any rate, I think the tough decisions will be how do we maintain services in what is a growing community. Look, if you talk to any of my constituents who are out in the unincorporated areas of Bexar County, booming, rooftops going up, all kinds of construction, we can't keep up with the growth. And so I think folks look at that and say, well, how's that possible? All of that happening and you're not increasing police and fire protection or spending more money on infrastructure, roads, and flood control. So those are the tough decisions. And look, some of this we're going to decide in the next few weeks. Some of it, frankly, let's assume we don't raise the tax rate going into 2027, 2028. When we look at planning for that growth, will we have to, go out for another flood control bond like we did back in 2007? Will that include infrastructure and street maintenance? And a part of that discussion is it maybe taking it to voters with this package because it's a potential tax increase in order to fund those things. So look, we're going to get by, I think, fine this budget cycle, but it's going to be interesting times, different times, not necessarily leaner times, because I have faith that the economy will rebound. But we also have to it's an opportunity for us, I think, to kind of take a hard look at priorities and plan, right? Have a vision for that growth, because, every projection you see is our community growing by millions over the next few decades.
Right. Do you have any regrets about spending from the reserve fund in this current year?
Okay.
I mean, this is even before we get to the really rough budget year next year.
Yeah. So,
you're doing it now.
Right. So look, I will say this. I think that, David Smith, our county manager, is always pretty conservative about putting these budgets together. And we had put away, I think at one time, we had over $400 million in reserves. Our general fund is about $800 million. So you're talking about 50% of rainy day fund, essentially. Mm-hmm. When I think the guidelines are typically somewhere around 10 to 15%. So in a sense, I think he was smart, and the court was smart to do that, because we were kind of saving for days like this.
You've got it to give.
Yeah, and it's not that we're being gratuitous with it. I think it's where we can fill in holes. We have some leeway. In other words, we have a little bit of a cushion. Mm-hmm. I certainly don't want to draw that all the way down. I don't want to get into a habit of every budget cycle dipping into reserves. Yeah. But this year and last year, to a certain degree, we had to use a little bit of those reserves just to make sure we maintained services.
Right. I mean, what you said that you're not altogether comfortable doing that. Yeah. Why is that?
Well,
what danger do you see in doing?
Well, a couple things. I think number one, from just being a fiscally healthy organization, things like bond rating is important to have a healthy reserve. We don't know what the future holds, right? We can say real estate's going to rebound, but remember, just 2 years ago, we were saying, we're going to have 2 or 3% growth over the next few years, and now we're down 1.5%. So that's, I think, my comfort level is let's be judicious with those dollars, keep somewhat of a healthy reserve. But if we have to dip in a little bit in order to maintain services.
So right now, you started this fiscal year at I think it was a little north of $400 million. Mm-hmm. And right now you're down to what, around $300 million?
Yeah.
So you spent about a quarter of that.
Yeah, it's about a third.
And what are you planning? What does David Smith's budget have in terms of spending out of the fund in this coming year?
Yeah.
How much are you going to burn through?
So I think the last number I saw was somewhere around 20 to 25 million of that reserves for this budget. Now, look, here's what the hard part is. You get a proposed budget, and he will tell you, and David Smith's been doing this for 30 plus years, the proposed budget's never the adopted budget, right? You have all these changes between now. Changes, yeah. And I think that's where commissioners and the judge, we have to be responsible, because there's all kinds of needs, right? There's always something that you'd like to tack into the budget. We do that at the very end, the day before we adopt the budget. There's what's called the change order memo that goes out. These are all the changes that people have requested, and those things can just stack up. And before you know it, instead of 20 or 25 million, you have to dip in 50 million. So I think this is going to be challenging in that regard. We're going to have to show some restraint and also, again, make some tough decisions, because, we had a discussion today about these impact courts that we set up during COVID. These were specifically domestic violence courts. So 2 visiting judges came in specifically to help address the backlog of domestic violence cases. Now, the judges will come in, and they did this morning, and say, look, we still need those courts. There's still a need. even though the backlog is not as severe as it once was. So, when you think about that, certainly if we don't fund those courts, we don't want to send the message to the community there's no longer a domestic violence problem in our community. That's furthest from the case. So those are the kind of things I think we're going to have to really focus on. What are the needs and not the wants this budget cycle? There's a diversion pilot program that I've been working on. I'm going to advocate, and that's not in the proposed budget, but I'm going to advocate that we put something in the budget for that. So that'll be part of the change order. So those are the kind of things that are tough. Hopefully we can get some consensus on, but it's probably going to be some pretty long discussions about what we can fund and what we can't.
So you have money you want to put into the budget.
Right.
Any ideas on what to take out?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I think that. There's I guess any department you can look at and say, hey, what is your base funding level? Do you need new positions? I know we had a dispute the other day with one of the constables about motorcycles, BMW motorcycles. And, look, I'm not saying
they're really nice ones.
That those are not necessary for
they drive themselves.
For public safety. Right. But I think there are discussions like that we have to have that are, again, going back to, I don't have a list identified of things that we need to cut. I'd still like to somehow, if we could, get our employees a COLA, but that's going to cost probably a few $1 million, and where do you get that from, right? So
I mean, you'll have county employees under the budget as it is now without a raise, but you've also got sheriff's deputies in contract talks, and they not happy with that. They want their raises.
I had a meeting yesterday, as a matter of fact, with those DSABC folks are friends of mine, supporters. So we've had some discussions about
the deputies union.
The deputies union. What do we do in a circumstance like this? Look, they're already in their evergreen clause. Their contract is expired, I think, at least a year ago. And I just don't think there's any reasonable way they're going to sign a contract that gives them 0 increases over the next few years, particularly when you look at, their contemporaries at PD that just signed a new contract that gave them a 16% raise over 3 years.
So does the proposed budget allow for any?
So right now the proposed budget
increases for the deputies,
zero COLA for anybody, even the deputies. So that's going to be.
Is that realistic? I mean, because obviously the deputies union was going to say. I think inevitably,
sure.
Oh, we absolutely want pay raises.
Yeah. Well, and look, you all know this. I mean, always the highest priority for communities is public safety, right? And so we've added deputies over the years. We've added constables over the years. I think this year the recommendation is no new positions and then no cost of living adjustment. And so what I'm hopeful for, look, I'll leave it to our lawyers to negotiate that CBA, but I think there's a scenario in which maybe we put something aside in contingency at a consideration for the CBA is not going to get locked in the next 3 weeks. It's just unrealistic. But maybe we have something set for a potential increase for them after the CBA is signed. Let's say either later this calendar year or early next year.
Yeah.
Given the limits on the reserves and also the ARPA dollars expiring, what long-term strategies is the court looking at when it comes to the budget?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, I think we're just starting to have those discussions. It seems like the budget, the past few years has been just kind of year to year. I think we need to start probably looking at a kind of like the city, we do have a 5-year forecast, but again, what we've talked about and I advocated for this budget cycle is particularly as it relates to our infrastructure. I mentioned, potentially down the road having another bond program for flood control. Maybe we include infrastructure needs there. What I'm advocating for this budget cycle is just to do an assessment. Let's have a professional come in, give us an assessment of what that looks like, what those needs are, and whatever it may cost, maybe $200,000 or $300,000 to do that assessment, so that going into 2027, at least we have a plan as it relates to infrastructure. The other things, the I guess the more difficult part, the moving target is always the jail. That's a significant part of our budget. There's been issues over there, and the diversion discussion, behavioral health. Do we have, again, longer term, do we talk about building a new diversion center so that it relieves the jail population? Because maybe in fact, and we know this is a fact, there are some people in that jail who shouldn't be there that really have a mental health issue or a substance abuse issue or both. And so do we get a diversion center set up so that it accomplishes two things, right? It gets the jail population down, but it really gets people the help that they need so that they can get back on their feet and be productive citizens. So those are discussions that are just happening. And I think there's two sides to that assessment. It's the infrastructure in terms of streets, roads, and drainage. And then there's the human capital infrastructure and what we do, not just with those who are justice involved, because that's always been the county's role, but before they get to that point in the preventative and behavioral health piece. So there's a lot going on. And, I was thinking on my way over here, back when I was on city council, I used to think, man, what those county commissioners do? They don't do anything. There's nothing going on in Sleepy Bear County.
Some of us still say that.
Yeah, we do. I've heard you say that. But there is a tremendous amount going on now. I can't speak for before. There's a lot going on. And I think the collaboration, with the city is going to be key, and any other private sector partners.
But I mean, some of what you're saying, like with the diversion center, right?
Yeah.
That's going to cost money. And, it could be that it's city and county money because you're talking about, maybe operating this jointly. But still, it's money that neither the city nor county government really has to spend right now. Looking ahead, you're a savvy guy. You know something about the economy.
Yeah.
Do you have any reason to think that the boom times are about to return? Is the real estate market in San Antonio about to come back to life?
Yeah. Look, I don't, I'm not that savvy. I don't have a crystal ball, but I have friends that work in real estate and, do a little finance work myself. So look, I think that, I don't think it's going to get better in the short term. I think, particularly leading up to an election, things seem to kind of just stay the same, right? And then depending on what happens in the election, maybe you have some change in policy either from Washington or Austin. But I have a lot of faith the resiliency of the U.S. economy is going to be fine. And I think in particular, when you have communities that have demonstrated significant investment in your backyard, like San Antonio and Bexar County, and you see where the growth is happening, to me, that's not just a blip. I think that is a trend. Sometimes it does kind of even out for a minute, but I do think it's going to continue. I don't have hard numbers to verify that or to give you to, I guess we can keep the receipts and see what happens in 6 months. But I do think that certainly going into the latter part of the year and in 2027, I think things will pick back up, and we'll have, again, when you look, if you drive out north or even to the south side, you see what's happening with some of the growth and the businesses coming here. There's rooftops going, and I think that's a good sign of the fact that I think we're in a community that's very resilient, and that'll bounce back.
All right. Are you ready to stop?
I was just going to ask, given the tough spot that both the county and the city are in, is there any conversation at this point about looking at duplicative or maybe similar services and condensing? Or
there has been. So one example is the committee that I'm co-chairing with Councilwoman Terry Castillo. That's more specific to the diversion piece. But I don't know, that this has been announced or is public, but I know that there has been discussions between the mayor and the county judge. I only know because Judge Sakai shares that with me, about doing some kind of a joint, kind of an efficiency task force, for lack of a better term, that would look at, things like double magistration, things like, maybe flood control, so I think there's conversations happening. I haven't seen movement on it yet, but I think they're at least talking about doing something that would bring both city and county together. We have these library systems where we pay them. There's a crime lab with it that we invoice them for. So there's a lot of, I think, interconnectedness, and the more we can have those conversations, the better. But I guess it remains to be seen if those are going to actually happen.
Okay. So now you're ready to move on from the budget.
Yeah.
Do you feel like
budget all day?
I was going to say, have you exhausted everything you want to say about the budget? Because we got a couple of options.
Everybody's
we can move on to
right now. Exactly. Still with us?
So we'll wake them up with either, we can either talk about, and we'll talk about them both. I'm going to give you the option.
Okay.
All right. Rodeo.
Okay.
Spurs Arena.
Ooh, tough choices.
Like I said,
tough choices.
In a way, it doesn't really. It's a false choice because you're going to wind up
talking about both.
Yeah,
exactly.
Talk about both.
Which one do I start with? Yeah. Well, look, let's start with, I guess, the Spurs Arena.
So my question to you is: there are media reports. I believe it was San Antonio Report had an interesting story on the fact that the county has not started collecting its venue tax. So back in November, the county had measure on the ballot that set aside hotel and car rental taxes for to kind of remake the Coliseum grounds and to put up money for the county's contribution to a new Spurs Arena. Why isn't the county collecting that money yet?
I mean, so first of all, the court has to take some action to officially start the clock, so to speak. And I think what I understand is that is coming after we get through the budget. But I think there's just, I'm not involved in a lot of these discussions, but I believe there was some discussion about kind of waiting to see where the city's kind of contribution shook out. And there were some discussions, as you know, about that. But we've got to essentially start the clock. And I think my understanding is probably by October, that'll come before the court to start the new assessment. And then probably some initial issuance of some of those bonds that were approved by voters, kind of a perfunctory amount just to kind of start the process.
Is the county slow walking this, or is this pretty typical for a venue tax? You have an election and then like nearly a year later, you start collecting.
Your guess is as good as mine because I wasn't around the last time one passed, but I don't think the county is intentionally slow walking it. I mean, I think we know what's been approved by voters, and we know where that $311 million is going to go. I think it's a matter of trying to maybe align it with the city in terms of when those funds should be made available, and starting the clock on kind of a parallel lines, I guess. And so I don't think it's intentional. I just think there's been a lot of, it sounds like, discussions with the city, and I think there's a desire to kind of align those timelines. I think that's the bottom line.
So City Council voted last week on whether to put the city's contribution on the ballot and narrowly said no. Were you worried about that in advance? What position does that put the county in if the vote had been different?
I wasn't necessarily worried about it. My sense was the vote would fall more or less how it did. And it was a little closer than I thought, but just in my conversations with some of these council members are friends of mine. I felt that it was probably going to go that way, and honestly, like, it didn't make me nervous in the sense that we know what the county contribution is, and it couldn't be any more than that because that's what we essentially had in terms of capacity, and that's what the voters approved. So yeah, it didn't make me nervous at all. I think probably it made a lot of folks around the Spurs organization nervous, but no, I think that and people would ask me, like, what do you think? And I was at some of those outreach forums and a lot of the discussion during the venue tax vote. And my recollection, there was always some discussion about, here's the county venue tax portion, here is the Spurs, and here is the city. And so, I felt comfortable the way they decided to move forward. I don't know that another public vote would have accomplished anything. It sounds like they may still have to go to the voters on an infrastructure piece, but yeah, I think the Spurs, it wasn't like we were expecting to start moving dirt in November after it was passed. I think we all knew there'd be kind of a runway to make sure that everything was squared away. Lots still to negotiate. So I'm confident by the end of this year, we'll have a little bit more traction on that funding piece.
City Manager Eric Walsh has said he's expecting the main contours of the agreements, the many agreements with the Spurs and the county, to largely be finished by the end of this year. Yeah. What are you looking for as those negotiations pan out in terms of the ownership, perhaps, of the arena, in terms of the county's role?
Yeah. I mean, I know there was a lot of talk about that, like, oh, the county's just giving away this money for nothing. My sense is that we should, and whatever the proportionate percentage should be, we should be landlords, just like we have been at the Frost Bank Center for 25 years. So whatever negotiations happen with respect to that, I expect the county to be at the table for those. I think there's still an opening for us to talk to the Spurs, that is, about our own CBA, community benefit agreement. What can we do that makes sure, and there was some discussion early on, even though they were leaving the east side, that they would continue to be supporters and potential partners.
Haven't you lost all leverage for that, though? I mean, by saying so quickly, yes. Well, we're going to do a venue tax election to fund our part of it,
right? And
there wasn't much. It was a pretty short runway, and I think the county's position very early on was, we're going to do this because we don't want to lose the Spurs.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was certainly that sentiment, but I think there's also, we come from a different position in that we have been partners with the Spurs for 25 plus years, right? So I think there is some inherent goodwill built in. And again, it's still business, so you're not going to be naive, but I think there's just a relationship there that I think engendered some trust that leaves the door open to some goodwill and having some future conversations. Again, you're right to a certain degree. Should we have had some of those conversations before we called the election? Well, we still have to issue the debt, and we still have to, there's a lot for us to go between here and that point. But I just think the relationship, having it been for so long, that I think there's some trust built into, is it going to be anything unreasonable? No, I think we'd ask for some reasonable accommodations. And I think, I think the other thing is, my sense is there could be other asks coming from the Spurs to the county, particularly as it relates to the TERS. And, I'm on the side of, particularly in light of what's happening in the economy, like, why would we give up additional property tax revenues?
Let's settle on that just for a moment.
What are the other asks?
What might the Spurs be requesting from the?
So the I guess it's the Midtown TERS. The county does not participate in, and so I'm guessing here. I've not been asked this directly, but I'm guessing as part of freeing up additional dollars that there could be an ask that the county participate in the Midtown TERS. Just a guess. If I was on that side, I would ask. And again, I'm not saying that we've had those discussions.
So in other words, property taxes that the county collects, that would now be included in the zone.
Absolutely. Yeah. Same as what the city does.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
that would create just like overall more money. We're talking about bigger pot of property tax. Right?
It could potentially. I have not seen the numbers. I'm speculating a little bit just because, it's still a business, and I think when you try and squeeze out as much revenue as possible, there's that opportunity as well.
Right. Now, be the political guy for a moment. Right.
Try.
Okay.
Try.
I know you can do it.
Yeah. Give it a shot.
Yeah. You can really do it. Okay. So county's going to be an owner. By the way, do you know what percentage of an arena might you? This arena might you own?
If you look at it just in terms of what the numbers are on the contribution, so it's roughly 500 from the city, 300 or so from the county. And then, the Spurs are picking up, I guess, the rest of that, 1 point, whatever it is now, 1.5 billion probably. So, I would think between the city and county, we'd be somewhere close to 40% owner, 45% owner. I'm just throwing out numbers. I don't have a napkin on me, but so then the city and county, I would think, would share in some kind of landlord-tenant relationship with the Spurs. Again, one of the lawyers kind of flesh that out, but I've not put any numbers to it yet.
Okay, so you'll be an owner. Your co-owner is, I think, inevitably going to have a few more political problems. You're going to have So you had last week's vote. Yeah. I do think. Yeah. You've got contracts that the city is finalizing with the Spurs. That's going to have to go to a city council vote. Mayor Gina Ortiz-Jones has been, I think, very, very clear about how the city needs to drive. Negotiators for the city need to drive a hard bargain, much harder than we've seen in the past.
Right.
Like from the county in negotiating with the Spurs back, for the SBC Center. Now, it could be that she doesn't get everything she wants, and when that goes to a council vote, I could easily see, politically, a replay of what we saw last week. A lot of, a lot of discontent, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of noise. And then you have an even higher stakes vote when the city floats a bond for infrastructure improvements that are going to be necessary for the arena. So streets, drainage, streetlights, all that to make the arena happen. It's going to go to a public vote, and then it's going to get really loud.
Sure.
I mean, what do you?
You wonder why the county's slow playing this?
Well, I mean, how concerned are you about this project? Is the arena? Is it just going to be so much noise that passes, or could some of this stick? And this could slow down the construction of this arena.
Yeah. So I think the infrastructure piece is significant because, as you mentioned, a lot of that infrastructure will need to go as kind of a foundation for the development, not just the arena, but the development around the arena. So it's hard to say if that's going to necessarily be a deal killer. Does someone on the Spurs side, if it comes to that, pony up and figure out a way, to get those dollars? I don't know.
You mean to avoid a bond election, or in the event one fails?
Well, let's just say that the first scenario that it goes before voters and fails, right? Is there a plan B, right? Right. But to preface that, you're right. I mean, what if there's an opportunity to just put that on the city council's plate and they decide, I don't know if it has to go to voters, right? I guess if it's GOs, it has to, but maybe there's some other source of revenue. Again, I'm just speculating. Walsh is a smart guy.
Right. And you do have contacts on city council. Are they talking about this at council?
I've not talked to them recently about it just because they were so
by
focused
using
on this.
Revenue bonds, it wouldn't need a public vote.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that could potentially be a possibility. I don't know. I think that I don't think that the project's in jeopardy. I would not say that. I think it's when you look at, I know there's a lot of speculation about it locally, but when you look at arrangements all over the country on arenas, this is a pretty decent deal in terms of private sector investment as a ratio to the public sector investment, right? So I don't think it's in jeopardy. I do think that they're always, as they say, devil's in the details, and I think they're going to continue to hash that out at the city side. I don't know if the judge is involved in any of that stuff, but I certainly am not. But I think that I think things will cool off after a little while. They just went through this really heated discussion. I don't blame, the mayor or anybody else for asking tough questions and trying to negotiate. I just think ultimately, this is an economic development deal. We just had HEB do an expansion. We had Toyota do an expansion, JCB. I view this in the same lens, is that, hey, these are maybe it's not many jobs as that, but it's a really an ambassador to the city. When you go anywhere, not just in the country, in the world, people identify San Antonio with the Spurs. And so to me, it's hard to even put a price on that when it comes to tourism and even folks that moved to San Antonio, right? They come because they heard about the Spurs. So I think when you look at it that way, there is a public benefit from keeping them here. And I think we'll all get to a point where we agree. Hopefully, that's my sense, but it may take a little bit longer.
Let's move on to something fun and happy.
Yeah.
The rodeo, right?
Rodeo, yeah. Who could argue about rodeo?
Actually, which is actually, it's the San Antonio Stock Show and Rodeo. It's a less fun thing to talk about than it used to be.
Yeah.
Madison, fill us in on why exactly that is.
Yes. So voters approved Proposition A last year, basically to renovate the Frost Bank Center grounds, the Freeman Coliseum, et cetera, and to make way for the rodeo to expand. Rodeo's there for a couple weeks now. They want to do year-round events of all kinds, essentially. Simultaneously, the Coliseum Advisory Board, which is an arm of the county, put out a request for proposals for that area, development in that area. Contemplated Willow Springs, which is a golf course the city owns, the county does not own. And so in response to that, a development group led by Hunt floated various concepts for what that could look like on the grounds. They put out a site plan with ideas.
Sure.
And that made the rodeo freak out.
It's a great hit. Right. Yeah. Exactly how you report it.
That was last spring, right? We got a kind of a flaming email or a letter from Cody Davenport, CEO of the rodeo. Caught a lot of us totally off guard. How about you? Did you did you know there was trouble percolating?
I mean, I didn't know that there would be that kind of a reaction to it, and maybe because I know Cody. I consider him a friend. I think he's a smart guy. Know some of the folks on that board. I think that the reaction. I don't want to say it was an overreaction, but I think that someone asked me the other day if the CAB board putting out that RFP, if it was. There was some bad intent involved. I don't think that was the case. I think it was more of like, here's, let's just say a blank canvas. Show us what conceptually we could do with this canvas. I think what irritated Cody and some of the folks on the rodeo side was subsequent to the voters passing the November venue tax election for the 189, I think it was. They were having, I think, some community meetings and kind of being shadowed by this group that had put this proposal together, almost like, oh, well, here's option B if you guys don't like what the rodeo is saying, right? So I could see that, rubbing them the wrong way. That was certainly not. And
I think Davenport, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but his, it seems like his concern at its heart, and I'm, if I'm wrong, correct me, is that some of that venue tax money could go to projects that have nothing to do with the remake of the Coliseum grounds, which he needs to happen in order to have year-round ready. So this is all part of a master plan to deal with the Spurs leaving the Frost Bank Center. You've got an anchor tenant just taking off, going downtown, and you don't want the place to become a ghost town.
Right. Exactly.
So the big idea coming from the Stock Show and Rodeo is to have year-round kind of rodeo-related events. You need a ton of money to make changes to the ground to make that happen.
Absolutely.
And he's worried, I think, that this private sector group is trying to kind of horn in on some of that.
Yeah, and I think too, there are some things that probably in some ways prevented the redevelopment around that arena for the past 25 years, right? When you look at good development, infill development, usually you want density. Well, density doesn't really work when you talk about the wide open spaces the rodeo needs around that. And so I think that there was good intentions to get kind of an idea, a concept of what you could potentially do, because I think everybody wants to think big, right? I mean, let's do something big that really changes the landscape of that part of the east side and in particular the urban core. And if you're going to do that, you need to probably have some private sector buy-in, private sector investment. So I think this other group came in and, I think it was probably like a $800 million deal, right? Which included some private investment. I think some of their conceptual designs were, again, incompatible with the rodeo. I mean, you're talking about, housing and parking garages. And, I think the rodeo has in mind they are going to be our anchor tenant there, right? What they need to be successful, and that is to bring in more rodeo type events, some not just redevelopment of the existing facilities, but also some additions out there. And, I look, justifiably so. I think we've moved past that. I think everybody got to their freak out moment. And I will say, and I just talked to Cody last week, we're moving in the right direction to get an agreement done. And I think the hope is that agreement is done by the fall, early fall. So that's what we're trying to work on.
Are there any pieces of the hunt plan, and I hesitate to call it a plan because it was very much ideas that were kind of tossed out.
Right.
Are there any pieces of that the county is going to still discuss about perhaps Willow Springs, other properties in the area? I mean, is any of that going
I think there's going to be continued dialogue about Willow Springs. I don't know how open the city is to that, frankly. And I think the compromise idea was, maybe at least some of the frontage part of the golf course, maybe push the golf course back. So I don't know if that's also still on the table. I will say this. I think there's discussions about, maybe a hotel out there nearby for the compatible rodeo events. So some of those developments, I think, are still part of the conversation. I don't know at this point it would be wise or reasonable for us to assume that Willow Springs will be part of the plan.
Yeah, I mean, have you heard anything from the city to indicate to you like they're even open to the idea of transferring Willow Springs? Because we've been talking about Willow Springs for a couple of years now as part of this big master plan to improve this part of the east side. And yet, apart from some initial willingness to go along with that on city staff side, that pretty quickly got shut down by city council. And I don't think Jalen McKee Rodriguez is the city council member representing that area. I don't think his mind has changed.
Yeah, look, I've not been engaged in any of those conversations, either direct or indirect. I don't know. I can't speak for the judge, so I don't know where. I know he's had I think kind of a small task force or working group of folks on the east side. I don't know where that is, but I just can't imagine things have changed that drastically from that initial position, which was resistance.
If former Mayor Ron Nirenberg is elected county judge in November, has he promised to bring Willow Springs with him?
You know what? I need to go back and look at my text. I don't know. You know what? I'll say this. Look, Ron obviously has relationships with a lot of those folks, including Councilman McKee Rodriguez. I don't know if he's had those discussions. I think Ron is very being very patient right now. He doesn't want to get ahead of the campaign. So I don't know if he's planning anything beyond November, but I do know, he's got relationships there, and, those could potentially help with any kind of future discussions.
You mentioned when we were talking about the many agreements for the arena that one piece of this could be the Spurs support for more on the east side, in essence, before the county might issue the bonds. What could that actually look like, and what would you tangibly ask for perhaps before issuing the bonds?
I don't know concrete asks at this point. What I will say is I think that there's opportunity if we're going to do something big out there. Look, the rodeo is going to do, I think, some great things, and I think they've got plans in place to bring some year-round programming. Fantastic. But there may be some things legislatively coming up in 2027 that may need to be, maybe it's a PID or a TERS or some economic generator that could change the financing of development around that parcel. So that's something I can envision, maybe saying, hey, city, county, let's get together and go to the ledge and try and get something there so that it can help spur on some of the redevelopment. That's the first thing that comes to mind. I don't know that there's like a bag of money sitting around that we could ask them for. But I do know that, early on when they were having these discussions about, when we first heard of Project Marvel, I think the Spurs made it, and I don't think it was private. I think publicly, they did not want the theme to be they were, pulling up stakes and abandoning the East Side, right? They think they are, and I know they are committed to not just the East Side, but all of San Antonio when you look at the community work they do. So I think they're very open to discussions, but again, we've not gotten to a specific ask.
Okay, I think we're going to end it there.
Oh wow!
I'm going to yeah. Well, it's only been an hour.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, flew by.
Yeah. Commissioner Rodriguez, thank you very much. It's been very enlightening. We appreciate it, and thank you for joining us. We will see you next week.
Thanks, guys.